Friedrich Nietzsche is quite rightly famous for asserting that, quote, God is dead. But it's been my experience that most people are not only surprised to learn that there is much more to the quote, but that the sentiment behind the quote itself, much like our protagonist Daniel, is almost entirely contrary to how it's been popularized. Here's the quote in its entirety. God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderer of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off of us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement? What sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? And I may not have the cheek or the sense of entitlement to try and sum up the most intimate and thought-provoking insights of one of the world's greatest intellectual titans. That is, at least not while I'm sober. But I can assure you, gentle viewer, that I'm currently dug into half the bag deeper than an Alabama tick in the middle of June, and I have the liver panel from my substance dependency counselor to prove it to you. What Nietzsche's effectively saying,
in the parlance of our times,
is that you and I are too fucking stupid to try and outsmart 300,000 years of human evolution by trying to eliminate the purpose and meaning we found in God without having the wherewithal to think to replace him with something, and in doing so, robbing humanity its only reason to keep from sprinting face first into a pile of cocaine, hookers, and gratuitous violence. One particularly well-renowned thief and degenerate once said, "Religion is the opiate of the masses." Interesting introspection there, Baron von Beard Dandruff. But funny enough, when religion stopped being the opiate of the masses in the West, opiates became the opiate of the masses, with much dire consequences resulting from it. And what's becoming quite evident, or what has become quite evident for my part, is that the most effective way to replace what is essentially man's only reason to keep him from destroying himself, as well as countless others around him, by way of the world of push-button access to unbridled hedonism we find ourselves living in here in the West, is to replace it with something greater than man perceives himself, something that can reinstill in him the virtues that have served as the most consistent variable to ensure not only his best shot at ameliorating his inevitable suffering, as well as the amelioration of the suffering and the flourishment of those he'll come to love by way of those virtues. And as I had alluded to previously, that something is purpose, as well as meaning through purpose, or rather, a source of perpetual joy that doesn't gradually devolve into a debilitating addiction. Through the engine of purpose, we sharpen those tools that help dig us out of the hole of unnecessary suffering.
Now, dig up, stupid.
Humility, discipline, and empathy. And as a man who's grappled with the notion of God his entire life, I was careful not to let that sense of ambivalence afford me an excuse to destroy myself through hedonism by way of nihilism. I did that by finding purpose in several ways. Through my family, through a desire to eliminate the unnecessary suffering of others, where it was welcomed, of course, through anger, and lastly through a disdain for injustice. But without question, the purpose that has provided and continues to provide the most joy and meaning for me is my family. What if it turns out that God, or more to the point here in the West, Judeo-Christian values pointed people in the direction of family, community, a sense of duty, humility, discipline, and empathy, not because it was necessarily divine wisdom, but simply because it worked. And at least I think most of us can agree that what works generally tends to outlast and endure above everything else that doesn't. Nothing, and I mean nothing, has the potential to fill you with more joy and meaning and purpose than family. No, I'm not going to blow smoke up your ass and tell you that it can't go the other way. In fact, nothing can be more crippling than the impacts their actions and circumstances can have on us. Having to bury a spouse, or God forbid a child, or seeing a younger brother or a beloved uncle fall prey to the likes of drugs or perversion, or gorging themselves at the trough of affirmation and attention they find through victimhood, the kind of self-destructive behavior that many politicians seem to have no problem applauding as brave expressions of your personal authenticity, of course, never leaves our hearts. But there's a reason why those things hurt the most when they befall us. It's because they're the aspects of our lives that make us the most happy, whether or not we have the time or the inclination to remind ourselves of that fact every single minute of every single day. But oftentimes it's not until they're taken away that we come to realize how much more important to us they actually were than anything else we'd been convinced needed to take precedence over them. Now, don't get me wrong, I love money, I love stuff, I think stuff is great. But what I could never understand, however, is how someone could be so emotionally dead inside that they can't even conceive the possibility that the happiness and fulfillment a person might get from a boat, or a gaming system, or an extravagant meal, or an expensive car, or indiscriminate sex would pale in comparison to hearing your child laugh for the first time, or call you mom or dad for the first time, or walk, or say I love you, or thank you for the sacrifices that you made for them, or to see them succeed after decades of hand-wringing over their prosperity and well-being. And it's for this reason that abortion and the dissolution of the traditional nuclear family model is a linchpin in the playbook of implementing progressive policy because, as the name suggests, progressing means positive growth through change. The problem with that, of course, is that in order for something to progress, it has to be flawed somehow. But what if it's not flawed? What if there's nothing that needs fixing? Or, more to the point, what if there are problems, but the society with them doesn't trust them to be fixed by a bloated, indifferent government? Well, that would be a very serious problem for the progressive politician whose well of power and influence hinges entirely on whether or not he can convince you that not only are you unhappy, but he and his cronies are the only ones who can make you happy. Now, what if we assume for a moment that a person who's granted so much power and influence, as well as all the money and amenities that come with that power, would be reluctant to give it up? Don't hurt yourself, but for the sake of discussion, let's consider this unlikely scenario. Do you think it would be outside the realm of possibility that he might consider destroying the institutions and aspects of a person's life that have demonstrably made them the happiest and the most stable, a reasonable means to which to achieve, maintain, and consolidate his powers? Well, if your answer was yes, and if you consider that nothing has been more satiating and stabilizing for human beings than the institutions of family and marriage, it stands to reason that any progressive politician desperate to keep his position would naturally do well to destroy those aspects of a person's life, or ensure that they're never inspired to pursue them in the first place. This is done, of course, as a means to cripple them emotionally, thereby leaving them desperate for solutions to the problems he assures them that are directly responsible for the emptiness and unhappiness they're experiencing. Don't worry, though, he can fix them, of course. He just needs your vote, or your money, or your blessing to let him impose more of himself in your personal life, or more than likely all three. When you call an unborn baby a clump of cells, or when you promote degeneracy or the celebration of victimhood as a means of personal affirmation to tens of millions of future mothers and fathers, again, despite what those who stand to reap the benefits of your misery and instability might say, you dehumanize, literally, the most beautiful and human thing you can possibly do with your life: make a family. And fighting against it starts by loving yourself enough to not share your heart, your soul, or your body frivolously, or by degrading human life, any human life, regardless of whatever point in their development they might be, by writing that life off as inherently disposable. You were there once, and I'm glad you made it. You very clearly have good taste, and I hope you stick around for a while, and I hope I can make you laugh. And maybe with a little luck, this can help you laugh with someone else, or maybe even a bunch of someone else's. Make no mistake, if you let them, they're more than happy to take this away from you if it affords them the opportunity for more power and influence. Don't let them take away the greatest possible joy you could ever hope to know, or take away the most precious gift you could ever give to someone. Go out there and get it, because you're worth it. And Daniel Plainview wasn't as bad as you remember him. Having said that, thanks again for being here. I hope to see you on the next one. But until that day, this is Santino Domani saying take care of yourself. And if you can, take care of someone else.